what would happen if we didn't pay for AI? Imagine like your prompt having an advert in the middle of it. If the goal is to kind of move fast, iterate fast, and make money, buy a solution, use an LLM or whatever. If the goal is personal development at the same time, go slower.
I think it's kind of crazy to buy auth. That just sounds like such a fucking nightmare to me. Today, I've got Elliot from Dreams of Code with me. Now, I've actually never met Elliot in person until this podcast, which is pretty cool. For a long time, been jealous of his voice, not just the accent, but also the tone and temper and cadence. You have a fantastic voice, man. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you. I never thought I had a fantastic voice. You know, everybody hates their own voice, especially when you hear it back in a recording. The first time I heard that somebody likes my voice, I was actually playing PUBG on voice chat, and somebody said, man, you have a really, really nice voice. So that was like my first inspiration. Maybe I could do voiceover or something in the future.
Yeah. Were you using a nice mic like this when you were playing PUBG?
like a horrible Razer headphone mic, you know, one of those gamer ones.
Yeah. Because sometimes the mic can just make it sound so good.
Yeah, I went through a bit of a microphone addiction because I was trying to find different microphones to match my voice. Because everyone says the SM7B, which you've got there, which is the podcaster microphone, right? But for me, it sounds very muddy because my voice is quite deep. So I went for something which was a bit more in the high tone. Anyway, we're getting into microphones discussions, but...
Yeah, I need something that brings my voice down a notch. And the best I've ever sounded is like there was a week where I just had lost my voice and was sick as a dog. And those podcasts were the best ones.
Yeah, being I don't really drink anymore, but being hungover used to be a good one for my voice as well.
Yeah, exactly. Cool, man. Well, I have recently caught up on your YouTube channel. So for everyone listening, if you don't know, you're most famous for your YouTube channel, I would assume.
Yeah. I don't believe I've done anything else of note.
Just the YouTube channel. No, but the YouTube channel is fantastic. I think you're sitting around 160,000 subscribers. Talk a lot. You talk about a lot of stuff. But notably Go, which I'm always excited to talk about here, of course, being my favorite programming language. So if you haven't checked out Dreams of Code on YouTube, go check it out. And recently, you've been talking about a few things that I find particularly interesting related to like how you're deploying on a VPS with just Docker, some infrastructure related stuff. What that all is kind of like building into, is my understanding, is you're building a new course platform on dreamsofcode.io. So you, like me, have taken the masochist's path to releasing courses, which is I'm not using Teachable, I'm not launching on Udemy, like I'm just going to build my own thing.
Yep, yeah, exactly. And it is a bit of a masochist's path because there's a lot to consider. Especially, even video hosting. I gave a shout out in my video I released today to both Steve and Aaron from Try Hard Studios. They've like put out a lot of content on like how they, or a lot of articles and content on how they actually built theirs, which has been really, really pivotal for me being able to like have, not only understand how to do it from my perspective, but to also build on what they've put out and just to be encouraged. I think this is something I used to talk about back when I was working as a full-time engineer, of like developer fear, which is I don't know how to do something, I'm scared to do it. And I think having that information and sharing it with other people allows you to overcome that fear of like, okay, it's not impossible. That's also something I really want to do. And I'd love to pick your brain on how you kind of built your platform as well at some time. But kind of sharing the information of like, hey, it's not that scary. This is what I did. Video isn't that difficult. Adaptive bitrate streaming isn't that difficult. It's hard, but it's not impossible.
I think we could spend a good amount of time nerding out about how, I can go into a lot of the infrastructure that we've used to build Boot Dev, and then we'll obviously talk about yours as well. And maybe we can learn a bit from each other about how we're building these platforms.
Nice.
Okay, so just to kind of set the context for everyone so they understand like what we're talking about. So dreamsofcode.io, that's the name of the website. You have not gone live yet.
Nope,
this
not
podcast
yet.
Will probably come out in about 4 weeks. So it may or may not be live by then. What do you think?
I hope it would be live by then. I'm like halfway through the editing stage on the videos, but hopefully it will be live by then, at least in beta.
Yeah, cool. Well, either way, you can go to the website and like put in your email, right? So
exactly.
Go check it out either way. But what is that first course about?
So the first course I'm doing is basically command line applications in Go. So the entire course starts at, it assumes it assumes the learner has some understanding of how to at least write code. It may not be within Go because we talk about some Go fundamentals. So it's not very, very beginner stage, but it's going through the entire process of how you can use Go to build command line tools. Starting from very simple, creating a command line application to count the number of words in a file, then moving through adding features to that, such as command line flags, command line arguments, talking about standard input, standard output, standard error, how you can use that with other applications. Then moving up to how you can like execute other applications from your code, all the way up to building kind of like our own builders for Go. So you can actually build a builder to build your own code for every platform that Go supports, cross-platform. Building an AI tool to generate Git commit messages from your actual stage changes within Git. So kind of all the way going up to...
Whoa, that's like a crazy step right there.
yeah. So like learning how you can create tools to solve your own problems as well, which I think is one of Go's strengths. And then we kind of end the module, which is going to be probably later on this year, looking at like popular packages. So most of the course is done using the standard library, which is obviously Go's huge strength. And then we look at kind of popular packages such as Cobra, anything coming out of charm.sh, and how you can use those to supplement tasks you would normally do with a standard library.
Obviously, for anyone listening interested in Go, CLIs, this course sounds like it's going to be awesome. If you don't have a good foundation in Go, I can selfishly plug our Go for Developers course, which you could take before taking the Dreams of Code course. But enough about that. That's cool. So we actually recently shipped, so the Primeagen did a Git course on boot dev, and we shipped a command line tool to like make it interactive, and we used Cobra and Charm and actually I think Viper like for the config stuff.
Very cool.
I'm actually not like I have not shipped many command line applications. I'm mostly a web developer myself, but it sounds like a pretty cool course. Okay, so you're launching with one course, and would you describe, so is the course like video first? Is it like a bunch of videos that you kind of watch in order and like you're doing steps along the way? What's like the format of the platform?
Yeah, it's a very video first course. So it's a lot of screen sharing, going through each individual steps. And then I kind of try to have one core lesson within each video of this is what we're learning. So learning about standard input, learning about standard outputs, learning about standard error, why you should write diagnostics and error messages to standard error versus why you shouldn't push them onto standard out. Just individual takeaways. So it's very cool. It's very video centric. I would love to do some interactive lessons, but I think that's going to be building on top of what I already have, which is part of the reason why I went with my own course platform rather than an off-the-shelf solution. Yeah,
it makes sense. I also had Aaron Francis on the pod. Oh man, it's been probably like 6 months now or so. I have to go look at the logs. But yeah, it sounds kind of similar to like his style of making courses, which is like really high production value, almost like bite-sized videos that you can kind of take in order, which is super cool because we're going to talk about how you built it, because that is nothing like boot dev. And then we can talk about like how we built boot dev and kind of compare and contrast some things. So would you say the biggest challenges building the platform have been about serving video?
I think serving video was the thing I was most scared about at the start. There's not a lot of resources about how to do that. And when you look at kind of popular providers, it gets expensive quickly. Cloudflare Stream was actually something I was researching earlier today, because there's an issue with currently how I'm doing that I want to solve. But yeah, I think serving video is the hardest part of building a video platform, undoubtedly. I think the rest is well documented. It's just mainly a web application. As soon as you add interactivity, and I think when you're compiling code on the platform, that starts to become more challenging. But for me, yeah, serving video was the biggest unknown at the beginning.
Wait, so are you compiling code on the platform?
I'm not compiling code, no.
Funny thing about boot dev is everything else was hard for us. You actually talk about this in your video of like how kind of standard business wisdom. What terms did you use? Core
versus context.
Core versus context, and like you should basically outsource everything that's not core to your business, right? And you should focus on. And I kind of did that because especially in the early days of boot dev, there actually was no video, and then we started adding video later. Even just like a few months ago, all of our video was just YouTube embeds. So we just did unlisted YouTube videos and embedded them.
Interesting.
We literally never got a single complaint, but we have since switched to using actually just standard HTML5 video players. We're just streaming like 1080p MP4s with no optimization. So like, I'm sure the video player on your site is like way better than our video player.
It really isn't. I'm using just like a drop-in component, and then basically I followed what Steve Tenuto put in his post on screencasting.com. I've changed a couple of things because I believe theirs is unauthenticated, and I wanted to have authentication for the videos. Not that I think it makes a difference, but still.
And you're serving the files themselves from S3?
From R2, because they have free egress, apparently.
Ah, beautiful. Is that the Cloudflare?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Is it like the Cloudflare S3 equivalent?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, I haven't actually used R2 yet, but I've definitely heard about it. So does it have like, because I know in S3 you can do like pre-signed URLs. Is that how you're doing it?
Yeah, you can do pre-signed URLs, but when it comes to HLS streaming, this is with the challenge. So I started with pre-signed URLs. The problem is it's a playlist, so you can only pre-sign one URL, and then that returns a playlist file, but you won't have signed files. You won't have signed URLs for all of the playlist files. That's something I actually want to solve because I don't like the idea of just if you have the URL, you can play it. I think Aaron and Steve do have that in theirs. Hopefully I'm not broadcasting a security thing, but I think like if you have just the URL, at least how I currently have it set up, if you have the URL for the file, you can play it without needing authentication. There's some entropy there because it's, a file hash that I'm using, so you can't just guess it, but still it's not the best from a security point of view, in my opinion.
Right. Like once it's kind of leaked, everybody can just like make a GET request or whatever.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, so I actually just did a course on S3. It's like our most recent course that went live. It was primarily about serving static files and like putting CloudFront in front of it. And in the course, we cover like streaming video through S3 and like CloudFront CDN. But all we cover is MP4. So we're like, okay, look, you can stream MP4. It streams using HTTP range headers. So like the browser can like very smartly just grab byte sequences, right? And so it doesn't have to download the whole thing before starting playback. And you used to have to encode them a specific way. So like the move atom was at the front of the file so that it would have the metadata it needs to start streaming. I found through trial and error as I was building the course that that's like not true anymore. The browser is so smart that it'll like poke around looking for the move atom and find it and then start streaming.
That's very cool.
I was trying to come up with an example in the course of like, this is how you don't stream. And like, I couldn't make the example because like the browser's too smart and it kept just fucking streaming the file. But HLS, so it's actually funny. You probably didn't, but I actually wrote an article on HLS like years ago on like how to do HLS in Go because I was building like a streaming server using Go for like a React Native application. And in our course on S3, we actually just kind of hand wave away HLS. We just go, oh, and by the way, if you need like better streaming, check out like MPEG Dash or HLS. And then we just like totally ignore it. It sounds like you're using HLS. Could you kind of give like a 5,000 foot overview of like why HLS instead of like MP4?
So for me, HLS is so that I can serve users with varying internet connectivity quality, basically. So if you have all of my videos are like in 4K as there's the raw file, they're actually 4K 59 point. I don't ever want to talk about drop frames ever again because that's caused me so many issues.
They're big files that look pretty.
They're big files. So there's also 60 frames per second is what they're meant to be. They're actually 59.947 or whatever that horrible number is. That if you play that as well, also I found out if you match 60 frames per second content with 59.94 whatever, every 1,000 frame gets dropped, which is not that many seconds. I think it's like 16 seconds. So over like a 20-30 minute video, if you're trying to match two tracks together with like your screen recording, which is at 60 frames per second, and your face recording, which is at 59 point whatever, it will start to drift.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was something I had to learn very quickly that you can't do. Anyway, I've gone on a massive tangent. So all my videos are in 4K, so variable bit rate basically is needed in order for people with less good internet connections to be able to still stream the content of the videos. Basically, I'm using HLS for adaptive bit rate, whereas I have three different bit rates, 720, 1080, and 2160. I don't know what the bit rates are. I think they're like 2,000, 5,000, and 8,000. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, so HLS basically allows you to serve more users that may not have as strong an internet connection.
So that's the big downside of what we're doing. Like I said, I actually record all my videos in 4K as well, but because we like kind of made this quick switch over to hosting it ourselves, it was like, okay, we'd have to do some sort of adaptive bitrate if we're going to serve 4K, because 4K will be really slow if you're not on a great internet connection. And so we were like, fuck it. Like, let's just do 1080p and call it good for now. But there will be a future iteration of BootDev where we probably HLS is what.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about HLS is it's just a file server, right? It's just like there's the metadata file, which I think is it XML?
It's M3U8. Which,
oh, that's right. .m3u8.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I think it's a custom format.
But it's like a text. It's like a text format, and you can like look at it, and it's just like a list of all the files that it points to, which like are all the little different sections of the video. So it's like you literally just like put these files in a directory and serve it with S3 or R2 or whatever, which is pretty cool. You don't need like custom technology like on the server side, other than the fact you have to convert whatever format you recorded into that format. Has that added like a lot to your workflow? Have you had to like build some scripts and tools to make that less painful?
So yeah, initially I was using the script that I think Steve Tanuto created, and it worked fine, but like I was doing a lot of manual process because I was also collecting the first frame of the video so I could upload that to like an assets directory. So that would be a high quality first frame before you click start. It was kind of grainy or very pixelated when it came from the actual HLS player. And I also wanted to use the file hash as kind of an identifier so that even if I like accidentally try to re-upload the same file, it won't overwrite it. So just using file hashes as a way of like indexing the version of the file. So I ended up just creating a Go CLI application, basically with everything that I covered in the course, which was really nice. Yeah. So I actually may go back and do a couple of lessons and actually talk about how you can apply some of the skills you learn to create your own file uploader, which takes the first frame, calls FFmpeg, everything, et cetera, et cetera.
That was going to be my question. So are you using like command.exec to just like call up FFmpeg? Cool.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what we do in our S3 course as well. Granted, I'm sure it's a way simpler FFmpeg because it's literally just like calling it and like doing the fast start encoding. Okay, very cool. So you then you serve it. Now on the client side, correct me if I'm wrong, HTML5 video player does not support HLS out of the box. So did you have to use some sort of library? Yeah,
there's I can't remember the name of it. It's HLS-video, and I believe it's one of the big HLS companies provides it. They also provide their own video hosting platform, but they just provide the HLS video component for free. So, cool. Open source software, just installed it, easy.
Do you have to build on top of that very much, or does it come with all the like playback speeds and the muting and I don't know, just all the other things you'd expect a video widget to do?
It has a lot of features. I don't know if it has playback speed. That's something I've got to check, but it has like pop out video player. As you scroll down, it will stay in the bottom left or bottom right for you. You can obviously build on top of it, and it's quite configurable from what I've looked at. There's some more I need to take a look at with it, whether playback speed is possible. But for the most part, it's pretty full featured.
Yeah, that's sweet. It really hit me like a truck as I was building this S3 course, like just how much easier our lives are as web developers today than like 15, 20 years ago. Like all the early video stuff on the internet was like custom built, hand rolled. The HTML5 video player does like so much.
Yeah.
I was blown away. It does like, playback speed. Chrome will even do like captions, like AI generated captions and like auto language translation of those captions. It's definitely like,
and it used to be Flash, didn't it, back in the day?
Yeah, it was all Flash.
Flash ActionScript. Did you ever write any code for Flash?
I was a heavy consumer, but I was not a programmer back then.
It was horrible.
Did you do a lot of ActionScript?
I like the first non C++ game that I built was using ActionScript. It was kind of like JavaScript but worse, which is a testament. But yeah, it was okay. It was fun.
It seems like we actually lost something. Like I know that the underlying technology was like pretty rough. You'd browse to a website and it'd be like, install like Microsoft Silverlight and install Flash and install whatever. And like, that's not exactly what you want. But man, like Flash stuff was cool. Like clearly it was great for content creators, making videos and games in it. I feel like the way it did vectors and the way you could animate things, in a lot of ways, we don't have like a cool thing like that anymore now that Flash isn't supported.
Yeah. I mean, I've never built a JavaScript game, so I don't know how easy or how it is compared to Flash, but I feel like Flash gaming, at one point, I was really addicted to Flash gaming. I was at university. I should have been doing university work, but I was just on Congregate, I think the name was the website, and it was just like a dedicated website to Flash gaming. That was fun.
I was a oneMoreLevel.com enjoyer myself. I don't know why. That was just my default.
Nice.
I was in high school at the time, and yeah, just a lot of that. Okay, very cool. So a lot of video, a lot of HLS. As I mentioned, with BootDev, we're very much like a video second platform, interactivity first. And so I want to talk a little bit more about the decision to go custom, because for me, I felt like I was forced to. I wanted to build like these super interactive lessons where you're typing code in the browser, or like in the case of Prime's Git course, like you're doing stuff on your local machine, interacting with a CLI tool, and then like, you're getting rewards in the browser. And so it was really like, I just needed to build so much custom stuff that like no reasonable video course platform is going to have. With your stuff, were you forced to, or was there like a different reason that compelled you to build your own platform?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like initially, there was, and I really struggled with this decision because, again, core versus context. Logically, the best thing to do would have been to just outsource that, and then I can focus on actually building the course and not have to worry about building it. But for some reason, I'm wired in the way that I have just a natural desire to build the solution rather than to buy the solution. Sometimes that doesn't work out well, and sometimes it does work out well. And I think there's like the whole discussion about build versus buy. Like from a business point of view, an economics point of view, yeah, you should probably just buy because it's going to be quicker and you'll get 90% of what you want from the actual solution. But for me, the kind of 10% that you lose, you lose the ability to have custom requirements, right? Which is what you needed in your case. In the future, I want to do interactivity, especially when it comes to more CLI-based courses that I have planned. And it's not going to be possible if I'm like tied to a platform like Teachable, where I don't have access to my user data, and it's going to be a pain to migrate people off of it. So that was like a bit of pre-thought there. The second is, even though you have the ability to buy these platforms, I still think there's the ability to learn by building them yourself, which I think is really important for one's personal development. If money is the biggest, like the main thing that you want to do, and this kind of ties into like my opinion on AI as well, and using LLMs for programming. Like if the goal is to kind of move fast, iterate fast, and make money, yeah, buy a solution, use an LLM or whatever. If the goal is personal development at the same time, go slower. Don't go too slow, obviously. Don't reinvent the entire wheel, but spend time learning these things, because that pays back in dividends in ways that may not come like MMR, the first, or like short-term MMR, but like long-term personal growth, it will.
I love that point. I built like quite a few like failed startups before BootDev, and I took this philosophy of like, I'm just going to build it. And people, I think it's really tempting to look at those like failed startups as like failures, but like really it was just a bunch of personal projects where I learned how to solve like real problems, at least real problems for myself, clearly not real problems for users, or else they wouldn't have been failed startups. I got so much exposure to stuff that I was not getting at my day job. Yep. Not that I wasn't learning at my day job, but I really think I progressed as a developer like 4 times faster than I would have had I just been doing what I was doing at my day job and not like really pushing myself nights and weekends to like build other things. Like that HLS server I was building, that wasn't for my job. That was some side project for, this other guy was building a web app, and he was like, hey, could you build a backend for it? And I'm like, all right, guys, I guess I'm learning HLS now. There's a lot of personal development that goes into that. And just one more point. This is something that I kind of stumbled into with BootDev. I have seen some creators, not going to name names, who get like really into content and then like just don't really code anymore. And I think this really happened to like some of the people I used to watch almost like 5 or 6 years ago, where it's like, they're so successful with their content that eventually they have to pivot their content almost out of tech because it's been so many years since they're like hands-on keyboard building stuff. And the beauty of building your own product from scratch is that you're staying hands-on and writing code every day, which also keeps me sane because frankly, even though I've built a lot of courses, I actually like coding more than I like building courses still. So
that is such a good point as well. Like that's one of the dichotomies of being a content creator is suddenly, especially, and this is something I've kind of struggled with internally, is the way I make money is no longer writing code. That's just not how I make money anymore. The way I make money is by making videos. And again, this is like core versus context in a really ambiguous way. But if I was optimizing for making money, I would be focusing more on how to build a system to improve my video production workflow, which again, building a course website doesn't actually solve that problem. I mean, I still think building the course website is better in general because it gives me content to talk about and it gives me new things to talk about. And I'm like you, I love coding, like more than most things in this world. Not everything, but writing code for me is such an enjoyable experience. Like abstracting it away either through an LLM or through buying the piece of software and then, uploading videos to a server, that's not enjoyable to me. And it just takes the joy out of programming. Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, like with content, and I have got really into content over the last year. Like I love pushing myself when it comes to videos because I think video creation is a really interesting skill to have and a good skill to have, especially with the rise of YouTube and content platforms and everything. But yeah, I'm like you, I love writing code.
I almost want to play devil's advocate a little bit on what you just said, because I actually think what you're doing, it's not maximizing. In other words, I think it is serving to maximize like your earning potential in a way. It's just not short term. Like I think this is where a lot of content creators kind of stumble is like, and I'm specifically talking about like coding content creators, because there was a lot of content creators that years ago had big followings. If you go check out their YouTube channels, they're just not getting the views anymore. And my personal theory is that a big part of that is that they were kind of optimizing for short-term views. In other words, like focusing on making videos, maybe higher production value, getting really good at like editing the videos. And then over time, they haven't been coding. And so a year later, they have nothing interesting to say about code anymore. And like the content kind of has struggled. So I think like what you're doing, it's just not necessarily optimizing in the short term. I do think over the long term, like people watch your videos, at least I do, because you have really interesting technical things to say. And if you take that out of your videos, even if they are like high production value, like beautifully edited, like I'm not going to watch them at that point.
First, thank you. Yeah, I do appreciate that. And I think you're right. It is long-term or maximizing for long-term success of, you could associate it actually with a lot of content creators, right? A lot of content creators rise in popularity at the beginning of when they first start making content. And then they slowly start to like peak off because they lose that relatability. And I think that's sort of the same when it comes to code. Like if you stop writing code, especially when you move to being a content creator full time, you're going to be exposed to code far less. You start to lose the relatability. And that's one thing a lot of people do call me out on comments sometimes is I now write code for myself, whether it's, to make money for myself or just to enjoy writing code for myself. So I don't no longer have the pressures of a product manager or Scrum or stand-ups or anything that engineers or developers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. That, some of my takes about AI, I think if you're in a high-pressure situation with deadlines, they just do not apply because you're going to use the tools that can help you get through your day job much quicker and much easier, especially when you have deadlines looming. You have less people that you work with now compared to like 2 years ago. Yeah, some of my takes aren't as relatable, but still. Just
relatable to different people, probably. It's funny how relatable to me they've been, at least your most recent videos. On this subject of build versus buy, this gets talked about a lot in tech, justifiably. Clearly, neither you nor I have bought a course platform, but there's a bunch of other stuff that goes into like building, honestly, any web app. And so like to name a few of ours, like for example, we decided not to build Stripe, and we are using Stripe. We decided not to build email, so we're using SendGrid. We actually did decide to buy like affiliate like code tracker for anyone that's watching and has like seen, code Primeagen for 25% off or whatever. That was a mistake. We're now building that ourselves and we're working on that. Don't tell our affiliate provider. They don't know yet. I don't want them to pull the plug yet. But yeah, we don't want to buy that one. That one was like really simple. We should have just built it. What are some of the things that you did decide to buy, I guess is the way I'll frame it.
That is such a good question, I think, because you're right. There's no absolute of always build, always buy. I mean, there's a spectrum, isn't there? I think On the far end of the buy spectrum is Stripe. Obviously, you do not want to be doing that yourself. Email as well. I think these are kind of like arcane arts. Well, email's more arcane than payments, but payments is you need to be certified and everything.
It's just a lot of work for like something that's so standard. Like you're sending strings like in emails and like, yeah.
So definitely email, definitely payments, buy that. Auth is one that I think is very debatable because on one side of the argument, on the build side of the argument at least, auth is devastating if you get it wrong. And getting it wrong is much easier than getting it right, I think.
Did you buy or build? I'm on the edge of my seat. Okay, so did I. I was going to say, so we might disagree here. I think it's kind of crazy to buy auth. I want to make the huge caveat that I've never bought auth. So I actually don't know what the experience is. So take this with a grain of salt. But I kind of imagine the experience, which is my users table kind of exists in someone else's database.
Yep.
And that just sounds like such a fucking nightmare to me. I also should clarify, I'm not saying I rolled my own cryptography.
Yeah.
I'm using standard library cryptography, but like, I don't know. I think it's way less difficult than people think.
I agree.
I think, yes, you need to like understand it. I think it takes a couple weeks to understand it. So like if you're a business person, I don't know, that's not a developer and you're like rolling your own stuff, yeah, sure, maybe buy. But like if you're a developer, like if your job, if you're employed as a developer, I do think that you should be able to figure out how to roll your own auth.
Did I say I built or bought it?
I think you said built.
Yeah, I did, yeah. Okay, good. Just wanted to confirm. Yeah. I did build it. No, I 100% agree with you. I believe it's easier than the internet has made us feel it is. And I used to always build my own auth. And then at some point, I got scared to do so. Again, that developer fear came in because everyone's saying you shouldn't be doing this. And there are a lot of pitfalls, I think, like just things such as rate limiting, credential stuffing, and then when you start getting into like multi-factor authentication and how you can implement those as well, it does start to build up. But like the simple credential email password isn't that difficult as long as you follow kind of the core rules of, make sure you hash your password using a good hashing algorithm, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's like use bcrypts and like your like whatever library you're using, like it will probably kind of force you to do the right thing. I mean, you got to do a little bit of like the function signature for like bcrypt and crypt has like 4 parameters, like look up what they are and kind of best practices. But I will also say one more caveat because I'm a big fan of this when it comes to talking about security. In fact, anyone that knows Dax, he's been a guest on the podcast a couple times, Dax Rad. He recently just posted like a whole rant about this. A lot of people talk about security as if it were binary. Like this is secure, this is insecure. And you kind of need to get that out of your head. There's always more secure. You could always put something in a Faraday cage and like, remove internet access and it's going to be like the most secure thing. And so you need to be really just kind of cognizant and smart about like how important the security of a given system is and kind of tune it to that. So like with boot dev, like I always want to be really careful about like, what's the scariest thing that I'm storing user data wise? And I have the advantage with boot dev of basically saying it's honestly just like your actual email because I don't even have your credit card info because I've kind of offloaded that to Stripe. So you want to think about like the blast radius of like what could go wrong and take extra steps. Like I would think about security on boot dev way different if we were storing like raw credit card information, right? And we need to like encrypt it and unencrypt it. So I do want to give that caveat of like, I think a lot of people are building web apps like our course platforms where it's not that I'm saying security is not important, but the level of security that you need to feel safe and for your users' data to be safe is not the same as like Chase Bank or whatever.
Yeah, I think I would fundamentally agree. That being said, to play devil's advocate, I do think auth is one of those things you can forget to do correctly or do so incorrectly. But I think that's mainly just due to the fact that historically there have been bad auth practices back in like the 2010s and stuff.
The stuff I read about then is like, yeah, that's great. Like storing passwords in plain text, absolutely insane. Like, of course, don't do that, right?
I mean, I'm arguing myself internally on this one, but I think like there's two sides to it, isn't there? And it's back to this whole building to learn is a good thing, I think, in my opinion. And you shouldn't outsource everything you do. And I mean, like, again, strongly about LLMs. I don't like outsourcing everything you write as code to an LLM. I think LLMs have some really huge potential for coding, but I don't like them as a coding assistant personally, because again, you're accepting the suggestion rather than understanding the suggestion, or at least in my opinion, that's how I find working with an LLM is.
So do you not use an LLM at all, like in your coding workflow?
I use like a chat agent, not a code assistant agent. So I will use like ChatGPT or DeepSeek or Claude, but I use it like a product manager and as a rubber duck. Oh, and as somebody graphic designer as well, or not a designer, sorry, UX UI designer, because I'm terrible at that.
It's funny that you say that. I was about to praise. I'm like, this guy's a Go developer, and yet his website looks incredible. That's not usually something you get from like people who primarily write Go.
Yeah, I'm terrible at UI. So I usually just ask an LLM to design me a nice user interface.
I see. Oh, maybe I have to dip my toes into that. We've gotten a lot better at boot dev. The first versions of boot dev were incredibly ugly, and we kind of leaned into the branding of it. We were like, well, we're backend developers. You get what you get. And since then we've put a little bit more effort into it. But that's okay. So you use a chat bot. So you use a chat interface, but not like inline code assistant.
Yeah. I was using a code assistant, and it kind of brought me back to that feeling of when you just first get started writing code. So like my first maybe 2 years of like professional software development, which was I'm stuck on a problem. I'll search for it on Stack Overflow, the problem, find a solution that looks very similar, copy that solution, paste it in, modify it. Like that workflow, I think most people, when you're first starting doing software development professionally, that's like a very common workflow. At least it was for me. And at some point, you stop doing that. You just know what to write. You can figure out the problems you solve yourself. You'll rely on your LSP or you'll rely on documentation and then work that way. It took me a while to realize what was happening. But as soon as I started using Copilot, it felt like I was going back to that workflow of accepting an answer and then having to modify it to fit what I wanted it to do.
This is actually like kind of comes through in the like pedagogy. I think that's the right word. Oh, that is way too big of a word for me to be using. Like the teaching philosophy on boot dev. I know that this idea of like copy pasting from Stack Overflow, I mean, there's memes about it. Like everybody does this. My brain does not like to do things that it doesn't understand. So like I've always just had a very like fundamentals up kind of way of approaching things. So I didn't do a lot of actual like copy pasting. I've read so much Stack Overflow, and then I would usually end up kind of writing it myself. But I get what you're saying. And the interesting thing is I do use both a chat interface and an inline code assistant. My complaint with the code assistant these days is not so much that I'm like tab completing a function and then having to edit it. And maybe that's because I'm writing so much Go, and like honestly, inline assistance in Go is so much better than in other languages that I've used, because Go is so like standard. Like there's like basically one way to do the thing, or one good way to do the thing. And so I mostly find the inline assistant actually just like doing exactly what I was going to do and just saving me the typing time. But I do have a bunch of complaints about like, it definitely wastes me time when it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's basically I accept it and almost use it verbatim, especially if it's like just 1 or 2 lines, or I just have to completely ignore whatever it dumps in. My hope is that as we move forward and the tooling gets better, there will be fewer misses. Because I wouldn't even mind if it suggested less often, but just that when it suggested, it was more likely to be right. The chat interface, if I had to like rank the two, the chat interface is the more important one for me as well by a long shot. It's basically replaced Google in a lot of things that I used to Google. Now I go to the LLM.
100% agree. 100% agree. And I don't know if that's like the initiatification of Google, because Google is just awful now for actual search. I tried Google searching the other day. It was such a painful experience that it actually made me appreciate AI and LLMs now.
There are search engine results pages for given queries, where you literally have to scroll past an entire page of ads before the first organic result is like shows up. It's under the fold, which is crazy. Like I feel like the people working on Google 15 years ago, if they had known that this is where it was going, they'd be like rolling around. Because like the original Google would always say things like, we're always going to put the organic on the left and the ads will be off to the right. And it's just gotten so, I mean, it's so pay to play at this point.
Could you imagine? It's interesting because there was always the debate about would people ever pay for a search engine. I was thinking about this the other day when OpenAI did their $200 a month pro plan or whatever, of like, would people ever pay for a search engine? I think AI is showing, for a good search engine, people would have paid. Like thinking of the inverse of what would happen if we didn't pay for AI. Imagine like your prompt having an advert in the middle of it. It would be horrific. So like,
I think there will be. And we should have this discussion. I'm trying to divorce my opinion from like what I think the world should be like and what I think it will be like.
Oh no.
And here's the way I look at it. Look at any platform where the product is like your attention. Hulu, Netflix, YouTube, Google, Meta, whatever. Doesn't matter. There's always two payment models. One is ads.
Yeah.
Second is you pay for it, right? And if you look at all of them, they all start in one of the two camps, and they all tend to merge into both.
Yeah.
The end result is cable TV in America, at least in the 90s, which is you're paying and you're getting ads. So it always moves toward that over time is kind of my assertion. And the only way to get out of that is to keep having like new platforms and new mediums that kind of force a reset in insert, which was the internet in the 90s.
Yeah, now we're back there. And you're right, because AI is not profitable at the moment. There's going to be a period of enshittification.
My hope is just that like there will be alternatives and options, and like there's always the like ad block and frankly the piracy alternatives that I'm not endorsing them legally, but I'm just saying like torrenting did drop really hard when Netflix came out because people were like, oh, I can just pay $8 a month and get access to like everything. I don't need to pirate anymore.
Yeah.
And now that prices have gone up and ads are being reintroduced, I think, we'll see a rise in piracy and stuff again.
So basically your inline code editor, when you start implementing or building your own auth, is going to recommend using the auth0 SDK.
Yes, it'll do two recommended lines. One is the like just standard bcrypt, and then one auto completes the auth0 SDK with like a buy now button.
But if you press tab, then it will open up the auth0 website.
Yeah. Something like that. I do think that like the most obvious one is people are going to use LLMs as like their general search interface. Like the distinction between search and chat is so minuscule that I don't think like it makes sense for you to like ask customers to make that distinction themselves.
Yeah.
And so, people are going to type into ChatGPT, what's the best place to learn to code? And ChatGPT is going to give recommendations.
Yep.
Right? It already does. It's just whatever was in its training data. And I think for those kinds of queries, it's like obviously OpenAI is going to take money and like, have paid options on the side or whatever. That's got to come at some point, I imagine.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a shame, isn't it?
It is. There is like one other interesting point to make though, which is that I'm kind of interested in like SEO and how it works. And I mean, obviously it's everything about like Google search has gotten really shitty over the last 15 years. But the way LLMs work, they don't work with backlinks. Like the way Google works. And really the fundamental, like if you go back and look at the white papers when Google came up with the idea of the backlink profile, it was revolutionary. It was what made search good. And anything that's good about search today in one way or another, kind of that is still the backbone of like when you have other people linking to you, you are probably producing something pretty valuable. And like that's how it weights everything. LLMs, my worry is that organic LLM results are more just weighted by like how many times the LLM read that in the training data. And the models don't update very often. And so you'll get these like really weird things where certain products will just always be recommended. And then because they're being recommended, they'll be recommended more. And so it might be this weird feedback loop where, I don't know, I'm skeptical of the actual quality of the recommendations is I guess what I'm saying.
And then we're going to start getting SEO experts in order to have their products trained. Really? I
get people reaching out to me like on LinkedIn or whatever because they see I own a business and they're like, we're SEO experts for OpenAI. Like we'll get that chatbot recommending your stuff.
Incredible.
I don't think they know how to do it. I think they're totally full of shit.
Yeah, definitely. But
people will be trying to game that system. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like we're going to find their training data and we're going to inject like 700 different examples of like saying boot dev's the best place to learn backend development or dreamsofcode.io to learn Go command line stuff. And it's, like people are going to play games.
That's incredible. I've never thought about SEO for
an LLM. Yeah.
Yeah. LLM. I mean, that's a business idea, isn't it?
Yeah. It's definitely coming. I have no idea what it looks like, but like where people's attention are, there's an incredible monetary incentive to game that system, and people will do it. So
yeah, fascinating.
Is there anything else interesting that you decided to buy that maybe you were kind of on the fence about?
I guess like tracking or any kind of analytics platforms. Buying one of those is obviously going to be a lot easier, especially with things like automation as well.
Question for you: are you in the EU? Where are you based?
I'm actually in the US.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, what state are you in?
I'm in Arkansas, of all places.
What the fuck? that obvious Arkansas accent coming out.
Yeah.
Why are you in Arkansas?
So that's a good story. So I was working for a startup in London that was building indoor positioning systems. So basically GPS, but for large indoor spaces. So much more localized. And the companies that were most interested in that technology were airports and I guess shopping centers or supermarkets. So Walmart HQ is out in Northwest Arkansas. So that's what brought me out here originally. And then I ended up getting married and staying out here.
Wow. Okay. I had no idea. I mean, based on the accent in your videos, it's like, he's like in Europe somewhere.
Yep. Yeah. I'm originally from the UK, but now I live in Northwest Arkansas.
Very cool. What a random place. Arkansas is not like, where typically people would go.
Yeah.
As like their landing zone. Not to offend any Arkansans. Not to offend any Arkansans, but yeah, kind of a random place. So you said you like buying analytics platforms. Here's a question for you. This is always like I think this will be interesting to people. The last time I talked about like GDPR and privacy and stuff was with Thorsten Ball, who is awesome, by the way. He had a lot of strong feelings about, staying compliant with GDPR and how it works. And so I think there's maybe one interesting discussion where we actually talk about like how you've tackled those issues, if you even have. And then maybe another one of like, at least I have some opinions and I'd be interested to hear yours on like, man, I really wish GDPR was just slightly different than it is. Because I think it has created some very strange behaviors, I guess I would say, online. Yeah. So my first one is, what have you done? Like, how are you doing analytics?
Yeah, so I am not doing any cookie-based analytics or anything at the moment. It's all back-end currently. And mine at the moment, that's like going to be the last thing I implement. I want to use it to basically improve the website. That's the main goal, rather than just like trying to sell to people. So what videos are people watching to the end of? What videos are people clicking off early? So I can go back and improve those videos or see or understand what's wrong with those lessons. And then also having manual feedback. As for like analytics for tracking what people are doing, and GDPR, I have not looked into that yet because that does scare me. That's going to be like the last thing on my backlog to do. But I'm going to try to keep it. I'm not going to go with the shady, accept all cookies or whatever. I do care about people's privacy, so I'm not going to go ahead and abuse it. So it'll be necessary cookies only on the site. I'm not going to track you across sites or where you come from or refer or anything like that.
I think there's, at least in my mind, I try to put a big distinction in my head between like product analytics and like marketing analytics.
Okay, yeah.
Up until just like, 6 months ago, we had taken the exact same approach of like, we're just doing stuff on the back end, which honestly, I still am so mad at like Facebook and Google that they won't just let you do everything on the back end. Like the fact that they kind of force you into having like a JavaScript tracking cookie to be able to use their products is like insane to me. Because there's fundamentally, like as a developer, you look at it, there's no reason I shouldn't just be able to like send you an ID that like, hey, this person bought this thing, anonymized, right? And that will work. But clearly they just want to slurp up the internet of data. And so I think that's like the fundamental reason why. But yeah, so product analytics, we do all of our product analytics on the back end as well. And it's honestly like, if you think about it, the best place to do it, because that's where the event is actually happening. And so like you always run the risk of doing analytics on the front end. Like, somebody has an ad blocker or something. So it's like they did the lesson, but like then the ad blocker blocked the whatever request made to tell you that they did the lesson, and it all blows up. So totally with you there. I guess I'll jump into the more controversial part of it, that at least for me, here's my big problem with the way GDPR works. And by the way, what we've done so far to get around GDPR is to not get around it at all and to just literally serve no analytics scripts in the EU, which also means it's basically impossible for us to do any form of marketing in the EU, because it's just never going to have a positive return on investment.
Yeah.
And so we just don't even do it. Obviously, for a lot of businesses, especially if you're operating in the EU, that's not an option. That might be like your first audience. So, but luckily, like our primary audience is in the US. Okay, here's my contention. If you're running any sort of small business, whether it's like you're selling some courses, you're selling shoes, you've got, wallets that you sell online, whatever it is, fundamentally all you want is to know when you like buy an ad that you got more money back from the ad than like you spent on it. And like, you don't really care like who that person is. You're fine with like all the data being anonymized. But you're in this catch-22 situation where the ad platforms, all of them, have built, tracking across the entire internet, basically. And in order to play in their game, you have to serve some amount of your users' data back up to them. And then here's the bigger problem. In my opinion, the real problem that most consumers should have with privacy and tracking stuff is that your data is being sold.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's a big distinction between me telling Facebook, hey, this person like came through your ad and then purchased so that I can go into my dashboard and see, oh, my campaign actually made money, versus me collecting all your emails, making a list and selling it online to some shady marketer who's now going to like, you know, send you spam emails and spam phone calls and stuff. And I just wish more of our legislation focused more on that sale of data. Like that is such a bigger problem in my mind than just like businesses trying to see if their ads worked.
Yep. Yeah, I fully
But it's
agree.
all bundled into the same thing. It also was crazy to me to learn that you could just sell people's data. Like, what the fuck is that?
Yep.
Like,
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of scary. And like when we were talking about kind of the rogue behavior of the early 2010s or even the early 2000s of like not storing passwords and stuff, there's more data out there that's like social security numbers that aren't being stored securely. Like passwords are kind of, I actually probably think there's more shady marketers that aren't storing passwords securely and stuff like that. And then this data just gets sold and passed around in like CSV scripts, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah.
It's very shady.
It's pretty crazy. So I don't know. I just wish that, because this is the other thing is like, I just don't like clicking on cookie banners. Like they're just so goddamn annoying. Like every site I go through to is like a giant cookie banner. And my contention is no one in their right mind is going to willingly accept unnecessary cookies for like no reward.
Yep.
Like why would I ever accept the cookies over not? The only reason I ever click accept is because it's the shinier button.
Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's they gamified it to make it so that you are tricked into, and the wording's always confusing, like allow necessary cookies or deny necessary cookies. And you're like, well, I'm clicking allow because I want to have access to this website. But yeah, it's all very, very shady. And you're 100% right. Like the thing about GDPR for me is the intention is good. Like it's a good intention.
Yes.
But it's caused this sort of arms race of how to circumvent it or how to trick users into opting into, you know, tracking cookies and everything. And it just, you're right, it hasn't made the internet a better place. It's kind of made it full of any sort of blog. But then again, this comes down to kind of Google as well. Every time you go onto a blog or anything where you just want to read something and you get this horrible cookie banner or cookie pop-up. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
I just think it could be, in some ways, I think it should be more strict. And in some ways, I think it should be less strict. And like, for example, I love the fact that websites are required to be able to delete your data. Mm-hmm. That's an easy one. Like we should all be able to delete your data within a reasonable amount of time. Like I'm super in favor of that. It's also forced a lot of like third-party providers to add API endpoints. You know, like I can hit an API endpoint in like Google Analytics to delete all data for a given user, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I do wish that it cracked down harder on like the sale of data. Yeah. Especially like raw data, like phone numbers and emails.
I fully agree.
I don't know. And then I just wish cookie banners would go away because yeah, I just can't understand the fundamental purpose they solve. Why would I ever click accept? Why would I ever do that unless I'm being tricked? We need a better way to have like a sane separation between like small businesses can figure out if their ads are working versus like, yeah, you shouldn't be allowed to sell all your users' data for profit. Or not for profit. It doesn't matter where, it's just to like, don't give the data away. Like it's crazy. Sorry, rant over.
No.
Where were we?
It's funny because I was using Mixpanel. Speaking of like privacy blockers or tracking blockers,
I used to use them too.
Yeah, nice. But I have like Pi-hole running on my home, which won't even let me log into Mixpanel to even view the analytics because it blocks the website so harshly. So I'm definitely I'm somebody who, you know.
So have you moved off of Mixpanel?
Yeah, I moved to Bento. I'm trialing Bento because it kind of does all in one. So it will do your mailing list. It will do your events tracking.
That's the one Aaron uses too, right?
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. I don't know if I'm going to stick with it or not, but I'm still in the trial stage and I like it so far. So we'll see.
That's cool. I haven't tried Bento. If you are just looking for like a Mixpanel alternative, I have preferred PostHog a lot to Mixpanel. It's really cool because first of all, it's got the open core business model. So it's an open source product. You can self-host it.
Oh, very nice.
I don't. I use their SaaS solution, but at least it's way cheaper than Mixpanel, and I think they've done a good job of including like, I don't know, just what you'd expect from just an analytics, like product analytics platform.
Yeah, I'm going to check that out. Thank you for the recommendation.
Super fun. What about infrastructure? So you built it in Go, HTMX, and Temple, and just for reference, we built BootDev in Go, which is just a JSON API, and we have a Nuxt front-end server.
Oh, nice.
That's kind of our rendering server.
And then Vue for front end?
Yeah, Vue 3, Nuxt, TypeScript. And it's kind of funny because I feel like a lot of JavaScript developers, when they're kind of new to the ecosystem, don't really understand this, but like, I don't think about Nuxt as backend at all. Like, we pretend, like, internally, like, yes, it technically runs on like an edge rendering server, but we just pretend that it's in the user's browser so that we never are even tempted to like put like, I don't know, anything that needs to be secure in there. So our backend is, like, I would just say it's Go and Postgres.
That probably would have been the stack I would have used to have used. I think having Go as a backend and then having Nuxt, Next, potentially. I think Next is one of those things that I'm always curious about. I once posted a question on Twitter asking, or X, if you can actually deploy Next. And I got so many, like, just on Docker, and I got so many mixed reactions from people. Like,
did
people
Dax
saying,
respond?
Dax did respond. Dax responded. Nobody from Vercel responded, which is interesting. But apparently, I mean, their documentation says you can deploy it on Docker.
You technically can, is my
You technically
understanding.
can. Yeah. For me, that little bit of magic always just gives me a bit of concern. But you can always just serve React from Go as well as a backend. So, but for this, I decided to do it differently than I normally would, because the real reason is because I looked at Temple about a year ago, and it looked very interesting. But the tree sitter package for Temple didn't support indentation, which in HTML is, I mean, why would anyone use an HTML language that doesn't have automatic indentation?
Rough, yeah,
awful. So I just stopped using it. But earlier last year, they finally supported indentation in their own Git repo of it. So I managed to get it installed, and it became just a joy to work with. From that, and again, kind of being inspired by Aaron Francis and being inspired by Laravel as well. I know they had Laracon. There was a load of hype about it on X. So I was kind of inspired, because Laravel, I mean, you can use Vue, I think, with Laravel, and you can use React as well, but you can also just use, is it Blade? Is the PHP
I think it's
language?
Blade, yeah.
Blade, yeah, the PHP templating. So I thought, you know what, let's just try it with a backend language using templating like the good old days and see how it works. I have another video coming out maybe next week on Alpine.js, which again is kind of in that same community to do client-side interactivity as well. So that Temple coupled with HTMX, coupled with Alpine, and Tailwind as well, which is fantastic for CSS, or fantastic for styling. It felt good. Like, you don't have to worry about, there's just so much you don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about SEO when you're doing kind of server-side rendered or server-side multi-page.
That's why we did Nuxt. We were originally just Vue 3, and then the single-page application, was a nightmare for SEO. So
yeah, authentication is easier, not leaking data. I mean, I've worked at companies that, actually the last company I worked at, they had a Nuxt front end and then kind of a Go API, and they would always run into issues with how to protect because they were using the same API route for serving their front, which that was the real problem, using the same API route for serving their front end as well as serving their customers who were meant to be logged in. But of course there was data leakage because they weren't constraining the data that was coming in, and you could, easily figure a way to get around it. Just serving rendered HTML, it just solves a huge amount of problems. So yeah, for me, it's a nice way of thinking about problems, which is interesting because I originally came from the client-server model back when I was doing mobile app development back in like 2014. So like for me, initially I gravitated to like Nuxt or Vue and React because that felt an easier model with client-server.
I do think that there's a lot of educational value to be derived from learning with the client-server model. I really struggled learning initially when I was doing like full stack Django development as at my very first job, because everything just felt mixed, and I was like, I didn't understand, is this logic happening in my browser or and of course, to make matters worse, in development, your server's running on the same machine as your browser, so it's like I don't know, the lines were just muddied. And so that's not to say it's like bad technology. I just felt like I like to understand what is happening where. And that's another problem that I have with Nuxt. When I'm using Nuxt, I'm just like, fuck if I know where this code is running. Like,
and I 100% agree with that, actually. That was one of the reasons I tried Django back in 2014. I hated it so hard. But then I don't really like opinionated frameworks. I had the same problem with Rails. I thought it's just so opinionated. I can't be free using it, if that makes sense. You have to do it the Rails way, which some people love. And I actually, now that I'm more of an experienced engineer, I can see the huge benefit of having a more opinionated framework, which is why kind of the idiomatic patterns of Go is appealing. But yeah, I think like back when I was learning, same thing as you had, not understanding where the boundaries of client, server, where is this data coming from? How is it ending up in the browser? Which machine is it running on? It all feels a bit confusing at the start. So yeah, I fully understand that. We
embraced that in our curriculum design. So boot dev, our main learning track is like become a backend developer. Mm-hmm. And course number, like, I don't know, I'm certainly wrong, but like 11 is like learn HTTP clients. Like teaches you everything you need to know from like the client side using like fetch, or if you're doing it in Go, like http.get.post. And then we teach servers like completely separately. And then you like put them together in later projects. Just because that's how my brain works. Okay, so question about Temple. I've been a Go fanboy for a hot minute. And one thing that I've always not fanboyed about, that I felt like the community did kind of fanboy about or fangirl about really hard, is the standard libraries templating syntax. Mm-hmm. Because like one of the joys of writing Go is that for the most part, OCaml enjoyers will disagree, it's statically typed. Like, you get autocomplete on stuff. You kind of know what values are in certain variables in your editor with the LSP and everything. Anytime I'm working with the templating language, I'm just like, this is a fucking nightmare. You're probably working in like a .html file. My editor's trying to like format it as if it were an HTML file. Yeah. I have zero autocomplete. I have to like compile and run the code before I see there's an error. Temple seems like a breath of fresh air that potentially solves this. I haven't actually used it, but
yeah, it definitely is a breath of fresh air. I think I don't hate the Go templating. I think the lack of static typing, the fact that it's so difficult to just import another template into it, I think that's actually one of my biggest issues. And I think that was what drove me to wanting to use Temple. Temple has its own issue. I don't know. I've not actually had any problems using it. When I first started using it, the indentation thing was driving me insane. The error messages were also pretty awful. I'm trying to think when the last time I had an error message was that I couldn't figure out. Recently, yeah, it's been a breath of fresh air. I haven't had any issues when it comes to actually compiling the Temple code or figuring out what's going on or why it's not working. And being able to import components is really nice. The static typing, yeah, it's great. Like, it's just something you don't have to think about once you have it, which is, I think, was the most important part about your templating languages. Yeah, highly recommend it. I think it's great. I think it works well with HTMX. It works well enough with Alpine.js. If you've ever looked at Alpine.js before, I think it could be slightly better with Alpine, but I think you can build things to make it easier to use. But yeah, no problems with it whatsoever.
That's cool. I need to actually do a project. I met the guy who built Temple at Big Sky DevCon last year in Montana. You should go to that this year. I think I'm going to make it again.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it on.
It's not HTMX Conf, except for that half the talks are about HTMX. But yeah, it's a pretty fun one. But the Temple guy was there and he talked and it was awesome. I just can't believe that the Go, like, and to be clear, I think the Go standard libraries templating, I really don't have much problem with like the syntax or anything. It's just the fact that I don't get any autocomplete in my editor when I'm using it.
That's such an important thing as well. Like, just having good developer tooling can really make or break a technology or a templating engine in this case.
People talk about how AI is going to, be this huge boost to developer productivity to the point that like we'll lose jobs over it. So far, and like, there's been a lot of advances in AI over the last couple of years, and it's been around for like a couple of years now. I get way more of a productivity boost from static typing, and I know like, Aaron Francis is probably pissed when I say that, or like DHH, but I swear to God, I get way more developer productivity from static typing than I do from my inline chatbot, or I should say my inline code assistant. I use both. I do think I get productivity boost from both, but like I would take the static typing autocomplete over the assistant 10 out of 10 times.
Agreed. 100%. Maybe that's why I don't care so much for code assistants, because I mean,
how
the
fast do you type?
Not that fast. 80, 90 words per minute. I've only just learned to touch type in like the last year, so...
Me too. No way. I just retaught myself to type last year.
Nice.
I always typed the wrong way, hands on the wrong keys. So yeah, I'm like 70 to 80 words per minute. And I say that the reason I like the code assistant is because I don't type particularly fast. So
yeah. I've been getting into snippets to help that. So more and more custom snippets. I think TJ had a blog post once upon a time, maybe it was TJ, about how to use Tree Sitter with snippets that I kind of like unearthed and got really interested in. You can do some pretty cool things. So it's not the easiest thing to build. I'm going to like hopefully do some videos on it at some point, but using kind of like contextual awareness with Tree Sitter of like where your code is. So looking at the actual syntax tree and generating snippets based on that. So error handling at the moment for me in Go is a lot easier than, because I just use custom snippets to do, am I writing to the S logger or slogger? Am I just returning a format wrapped error? Am I...
Oh, I saw your video on this. It was really good. Yeah,
it's cool. I'm going to do a video on it when I've kind of gotten through some of the kinks of it, but it definitely speeds things up a lot.
It's funny, since you've like learned how to do it and set it up and probably gotten used to it, it's probably faster the way you do it. That's been honestly like the biggest, it's hilarious. People are like up in arms about AIs taking code developer jobs. That has been like the single best use for me of inline code assistant is the if error does not equal nil line. Because just like it sees how I did it in the rest of the file and just follows the pattern. Yeah. And so like it'll wrap the error in like a, within a logger. And so just like pattern recognizes and does it. Yep. And so I haven't had any need to like figure out snippets because
That's honestly because I don't use AI anymore. I think the two things that I miss from using an inline editor were table-driven test parameters.
Yes.
So that sucks. Like that's the worst thing of writing Go, having to fill those out. It's okay once, like even just having a stub where you could just fill out the parameters would be fine. But like getting that boilerplate set up, hate it.
Writing the for loop, writing the giant
it's better
slice of structs.
It's better than the alternative of like how back when you used to have to write all the test cases out manually and repeat that sucks. Not having tests sucks in my opinion as well, although depends on how many users you have is my thought process there. Yeah, so table-driven test parameters, AI, fantastic for that, and the if error blocks, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do try to use AI, and part of the reason I do try to use AI so much is because, like, students are very rightfully concerned, like, right? Like, they're like, I don't want to learn from some, I don't know, boomer developer who, like, is just ignoring AI, and, like, am I really going to have a job? But, like, I try to keep a really close pulse on like what's happening in AI and how it's actually affecting my work, because my assumption is unless other people are like goddamn prompt wizards, it's probably affecting their work about the same as mine. Yeah. And like we just hired another developer last month. Yeah, it's been love AI. Definitely have an impact, but I don't I
really want to. I've got an idea for a video that I'm going to do at some point where I just solely rethink how I use AI and try to use it in order to build an entire application. I did like some preliminary research. One thing I really noticed is this is something I've kind of thought about, and I don't know if it's like the chicken and egg situation here, but whenever you ask, hey, build me an application for this, I don't know, a teleprompter, that's something I was trying to build an application for, just using AI, just a teleprompter app. There's no good ones for Linux, so I thought just build a website where it does the speech recognition API, records my voice, it can jump to where I'm actually speaking on the teleprompter. Every time I would just start the project from scratch with a large language model, it would default to React and Tailwind, right? And like one thing I was kind of thinking about that is that going to push developers to now use those technologies more? I know there's already a push within the industry, and kind of how does that look for the future if we rely so much on LLMs? Is it going to be that with any companies that don't adopt the technologies that LLMs support, are they going to be at a disadvantage if we have a dependency on LLMs for writing code? It's like kind of interesting where that ends up. Or, I mean, as you say, Go is pretty good for code editors, so maybe it's going to be okay. But like, I'm interested in the Rust front end frameworks like Leptos and Dioxas. I really want to spend some time this year learning them. From what I've seen, OpenAI can't write code for those platforms. I think Claude can maybe, and DeepSeek can as well. But yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see, like, is this going to funnel us into popular technologies?
We talked about this. I think this is a very similar discussion to what we talked about earlier, which is like, the LLM will have this feedback loop of like what is recommended will be recommended harder. And I think that's true. So like my default response to you is like, I think so, maybe unfortunately. But I will say, I think that LLMs, so like on Boot Dev, we have our integrated Boots like chatbot. And you can ask him questions about your code when you get stuck, and he's got like the full context of the lesson and everything. I do think that just one counterpoint is that yes, the models might be pushing us towards something, but it is now easier than ever to learn basically anything.
Yeah.
I'm going through the process of like buying a house right now, and I open ChatGPT all the time so that I don't look like an idiot when I'm talking to like the selling agent. I'm like, wait, what does like that term mean? And like, it's super helpful. So I do think that like there's a minimum barrier for programming languages, at least there's a minimum amount of like training data that the LM needs to have to be able to help you.
Yep.
But in a lot of ways, I think it'll be easier to learn some of the esoteric languages, like for example, OCaml, that have been around forever. And so like it knows kind of how to get you going because you won't need to rely so much on like, live help from community members.
Right. Yeah. And that's actually, and you're 100% right, because I've been using it for like business stuff. So tax remittance, right? At least not taking it, being skeptical over the answers that it gives, but at least it points you into the right direction of where you can go to like start researching things further. One thing like reseller's license, I've never heard of that before, apart from because I want to resell some products that I've been kind of like designing. And I have no idea what a reseller's license is. That's like a very US specific thing. But you go to ChatGPT, it will give you instructions on where to go to figure that stuff out, whether it's the state website or whatever. So it replaces, again, back to kind of the initiatification of Google. It just replaces a search engine in that it's more directed information or more direct response.
Have you ever like been in a conversation where people are talking about how like they're good at Googling stuff?
Yeah. I'm sure I used to say that.
Yeah. And like, I genuinely think I'm pretty good at Googling stuff. Like, I think I'm like top 20%, Googler. I do think that I think the term prompt engineer is kind of funny because I don't think it's I don't think it's a real engineering discipline. But I do think that people are going to be good at prompting not good at prompting. This is where I want to make the distinction. Good at using chat like LLMs, but I don't think it's what everyone's thinking, which is they're going to be meticulously crafting amazing prompts to get these great responses.
Yep.
I think it's more just like knowing when to trust, when not to trust, when, giant fucking citation needed on what the LLM tells you.
Yeah.
Cause I use it as a, just like there's a scene in Adventure Time where the ChatGPT has approximate knowledge of many things. It's kind of it's the meme from Adventure Time, and it's just like everything I get from it is like there's giant citation needed, but it helps me zero in on what I should then maybe go Google or find a citation for or a source to back up.
100% agreed. I use it kind of for things that I'm not good at. I mean, we talked about that before, right? Like UI. Product management is also a really good one of like, hey, how can I make, what feature should I add to this? That's like a weird use case that I've found more and more to be accessible. And then just rubber ducking, like I'm thinking of building an application to upload videos. This is what I'm currently thinking. What do you think? How would you improve that? One
kind of cheap trick that I've found that works really well when you're doing that, by the way, that's worked for me at least, is rather than always asking it questions, ask it to ask you questions.
Oh, that's a good
one.
Hey,
I'm getting into this project. It's XYZ. What kind of questions would you ask me to make sure that I'm going down the right path?
Yeah,
you kind of
just
get into this Socratic dialogue. It's kind of
that's a great tip. That's not a cheap trick. That's a good tip.
It's cheap because it's free. Cool, man. Well, this has been so much fun. We've been going for an hour and a half. I have had a great time. I want to give you just kind of one last chance to plug everything that you want our listeners to hear about, and so they can find you, find your course, find your content, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, self-promotion is not my good thing. Okay, how do I do a plug? You can find me on youtube.com/@dreamsofcode. You can find me on X at, I think, dreamsofcode_io. And you can find me on my website at dreamsofcode.io. We're going to have one course coming out this month and hopefully many more for the rest of this year.
Incredible. Awesome. Thanks so much, Elliot. Good luck with
Thanks,
everything.
Lane.
Super excited to see the course when it comes out. It looks like it's going to be a banger. So, yeah.
Cheers. Thanks, Lane. Thanks for having me on as well.